deadly Copperhead venom. An impossible choice. When the son of an outlaw leader lies dying in the Texas Badlands, a captive Apache warrior must decide whether to save the life of his enemy or let justice take its course. What he does next will shatter everything both men thought they knew about loyalty, honor, and survival. The late summer heat shimmered across the rocky canyon walls of West Texas as the Rafferty gang rode hard into their hideout. A collection of rough timber structures and canvas shelters tucked into a box canyon 30 miles south of the New Mexico border. Leading the riders was Victor Rafferty, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness had earned him a price on his head in 3 territories. Behind him rode his only son, Tucker, a young man of 23 winters who had grown up learning the outlaw trade from men who answered to no law but their own. Among the riders, bound at the wrists but allowed to sit his horse with dignity, was Hulkin, a warrior of the Mescalero Apache. He had been captured 2 months earlier during a skirmish near the Rio Grande, taken not for ransom, but for a darker purpose. The Rafferty gang had been losing men to Apache raids, and Victor Rafferty believed that keeping a warrior hostage might discourage further attacks on their supply routes. Haken was 30 years old, lean and hardened by a lifetime spent moving across the brutal desert landscape. His people had been fighting a losing battle against both Mexican soldiers and American settlers for generations, pushed ever further into the harshest corners of the territory. Tucker Rafferty had watched the Apache prisoner closely over the past weeks, intrigued despite himself by the man's quiet dignity. Unlike many of the gang members who viewed Haken with contempt or casual cruelty, Tucker found himself drawn to observe how the warrior carried himself, never begging, never showing fear, but also never displaying the hatred that surely burned beneath the surface. Haken had been given basic tasks around the camp, hauling water from the spring, tending the cook fires, repairing tack and saddles. He performed each duty without complaint, his dark eyes always watchful, always calculating. The canyon hideout was well chosen, accessible only through a narrow passage that could be easily defended, with high walls providing shelter from the wind and concealment from any lawmen who might come searching. A spring-fed creek ran along the eastern wall, providing fresh water year-round. The outlaws had built crude but functional structures, a large common building that served as mess hall and meeting place, several smaller cabins for senior gang members, and a corral for the horses. Haken slept in a small lean-to near the corral, guarded but not chained. As Victor Rafferty believed a man allowed some measure of dignity, made a more compliant hostage. On this particular afternoon, as the gang returned from a successful raid on a freight wagon carrying mining equipment, the mood in camp was celebratory. They had taken tools, dynamite, and a strongbox containing the mining company's payroll without firing a shot. Victor Rafferty ordered whiskey broken out, and the men gathered around the fire pit as the sun began its descent toward the canyon rim. Tucker helped unload the stolen goods, directing younger gang members to stash the dynamite in the powder magazine. A reinforced dugout carved into the canyon wall well away from the living quarters. Haken watched the activity from his position near the corral where he was brushing down the horses. Tucker noticed the Apache's attention seemed focused not on the celebration, but on the surrounding terrain. The rocky slopes, the vegetation clinging to crevices in the stone walls, the patterns of shadow as evening approached. It was the behavior of a man who never stopped gathering information, never stopped planning, even when planning seemed futile. As the celebration continued, Victor Rafferty called Tucker over to the main fire. The older man's face was flushed with whiskey and satisfaction, his gray-streaked beard stained with tobacco juice. He clapped a heavy hand on his son's shoulder and announced to the assembled gang that Tucker would lead the next raid. A stagecoach run that carried deposits from the Territorial Bank in El Paso. It was a significant responsibility. A public acknowledgement that Tucker was being groomed to eventually take over leadership of the gang. The men raised their cups in approval. and Tucker felt the weight of expectation settle on him like an invisible burden. Later that evening, after the celebration had died down and most of the gang had retreated to their bunks or settled into card games, Tucker found himself restless. He walked the perimeter of the camp, ostensibly checking that sentries were posted, but truthfully seeking solitude. The life of an outlaw was the only one he had ever known. His mother had died when he was 6, and his father had raised him in camps like this one, teaching him to shoot, to ride, to survive by taking what he needed from a world that gave nothing freely. Yet recently, Tucker had begun to feel something he could not quite name. A hollowness, a question about whether this was truly the only path available to him. His wandering brought him to the corral where Hakan sat cross-legged near the lean-to, working by moonlight to repair a bridle that had broken during the day's ride. Tucker paused, watching the Apache's skilled hands work the leather, his movements precise and unhurried. After a moment, Tucker approached and sat down on a nearby barrel, maintaining a respectful distance. "You do good work," Tucker said, gesturing at the bridle. Hakan glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable, then returned his attention to the leather. For a long moment, there was only silence broken by the distant sounds of men talking and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Finally, Hakan spoke in accented but clear English, a language he had learned through years of trading and conflict with white settlers. A man should know how to make and repair the tools he depends on. To rely always on others is to be weak. Tucker nodded, surprised by the response. "My father taught me to shoot before he taught me to mend," he said. Said a fast gun was worth more than a steady hand with a needle. "A fast gun makes enemies," Hakan replied without looking up. "A steady hand with a needle makes allies." "Your father has many enemies." The observation was stated as simple fact, without judgment or malice. Tucker found himself unable to argue the point. "That is the life we chose," he said, though even as he spoke the words, he wondered if choice had truly been involved. He had been raised to this life the way Hakan had been raised to his, shaped by circumstances beyond any individual's control. "Did you choose it?" Hakan asked, "or did it choose you?" The question hung in the air between them. Tucker had no answer, or rather, he had an answer he was not ready to speak aloud. Instead, he changed the subject. "Do your people know you are alive?" he asked. "Will they come for you?" Hakan set down the bridle and looked directly at Tucker for the first time in the conversation. His eyes were dark and steady, reflecting the moonlight. "My people know that I live," he said. "Whether they come depends on many things. The season, the movement of soldiers, the needs of the band. One man is not worth risking many. That is a hard way to see the world." Tucker said, "It is a realistic way," Hakan corrected. "Among my people, we understand that the survival of the community matters more than any individual. It is a lesson your people have not learned, and it will destroy you in the end." Before Tucker could respond, a shout came from the direction of the powder magazine. Both men rose instinctively, alert to danger. Tucker's hand went to the revolver at his hip as he turned toward the commotion. Several gang members were running toward the dugout, and Tucker could see his father striding in that direction, his face dark with anger. Tucker jogged over to find out what had caused the disturbance, leaving Hakan standing alone by the corral. When he reached the powder magazine, he found 2 of the younger gang members, brothers named Pike and Samuel, arguing loudly. His father was demanding an explanation. Samuel here tried to sneak some of the dynamite, Pike was saying. "Caught him red-handed stuffing sticks in his saddlebag. I was just taking what is owed to me," Samuel protested. "We all risked our necks on that raid, and I aimed to get my fair share." Victor Rafferty's voice cut through the argument like a blade. "You will get your share when I say you get it, and not before. Nobody touches the dynamite without my say-so. You know the rules." The confrontation continued, with Samuel growing more belligerent and Victor's patience wearing thinner. Tucker knew his father's temper. knew that this situation could turn violent quickly. He was about to intervene when his father made a sudden decision, ordering Samuel confined to one of the storage sheds until he sobered up and learned some respect. 2 men dragged the protesting Samuel away, and the crowd began to disperse. Tucker remained behind with his father, who stood fuming at the entrance to the powder magazine. "This is what happens when you let men get too comfortable," Victor said. "They forget that discipline is what keeps us alive. Tomorrow I want you to take Samuel out on patrol, remind him what real work looks like." Tucker nodded, though privately he thought his father's management style created as many problems as it solved. He was turning to leave when Victor grabbed his arm. "You have the makings of a good leader, son," the older man said, his voice softer now. "But you are too soft sometimes. Out here, mercy is weakness. Remember that." The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Tucker woke early and made his way to the creek to wash, finding the camp already stirring to life. Haken was at the cook fire, helping prepare the morning meal under the watchful eye of Bull McKenna, the gang's cook and one of the few men who showed the Apache any measure of kindness. Tucker ate quickly, then gathered Samuel and 2 other men for a ride to check the approaches to the canyon. A routine patrol to ensure no lawmen or rival gangs had picked up their trail. They rode out through the narrow canyon passage as the sun climbed higher, spreading across the rocky terrain in a loose formation. Tucker led them south toward a series of rocky outcroppings where they could survey the surrounding country. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all stone and scrub and endless sky. Tucker found himself thinking about his conversation with Haken the night before, about choice and fate and the paths men followed. They had been riding for perhaps 2 hours when Tucker's horse stumbled slightly on loose rock. He dismounted to check the animal's hooves, finding a small stone wedged in the shoe. As he worked to remove it, he noticed a peculiar plant growing in a crevice between 2 boulders, its leaves a distinctive pattern he recognized from his youth. His mother, in the brief time he had known her, had taught him about plants, which ones were edible, which ones could heal, which ones could kill. He was so focused on this memory that he did not see the Copperhead until it was too late. The snake, disturbed by his presence and perhaps defending a nest, struck with the lightning speed characteristic of its species. Tucker felt a sharp burning pain in his left hand, just above the wrist, and jerked back instinctively. The Copperhead, its distinctive hourglass pattern visible in the harsh sunlight, slithered away into the rocks. Samuel and the others rushed over as Tucker gripped his wrist, already feeling the venom beginning to spread. The 2 fang marks were clearly visible, welling with blood and a clear fluid. Tucker's mind raced through what he knew about Copperhead bites. Painful and dangerous, but not usually fatal to a healthy adult if treated properly. The problem was that proper treatment required knowledge and materials they did not have out here in the Badlands. "We need to get you back to camp," Samuel said, his earlier resentment forgotten in the face of genuine concern. Tucker nodded, already feeling the first waves of nausea that signaled the venom's effects. They helped him onto his horse, and the small group turned back toward the canyon. Riding as quickly as the rough terrain allowed, by the time they reached camp, Tucker's hand had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and the pain had spread up his arm like liquid fire. His father met them at the entrance, his face going pale when he saw his son's condition. They carried Tucker to his cabin and laid him on the bed while Victor shouted for Bull McKenna, who had some experience with field medicine. Bull examined the wound, his expression grave. "It is a Copperhead for sure," he said. "The venom is already spreading. We need to slow it down, stop it from reaching his heart." He called for whiskey, a knife, and clean cloth, preparing to make cuts around the wound to let it bleed freely. A treatment of questionable effectiveness, but the best they had. As Bull prepared his crude instruments, Victor Rafferty paced the small cabin like a caged animal. Outside, Word had spread through the camp, and men gathered in worried clusters. Tucker lay on the bed, his breathing growing labored, his skin taking on a gray pallor. The venom was affecting his system, and without proper anti-venom, his chances of survival were uncertain at best. It was then that Haken appeared at the cabin door, pushing past the men who tried to stop him. Victor whirled, his hand going to his gun, but Haken raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I can help," the Apache said, his voice calm and clear. "I know the medicine for snake venom. My people have treated such bites for generations." Victor's face twisted with suspicion and desperation warring for dominance. "Why would you help him?" he demanded. "You are our prisoner. You owe us nothing." Haken's eyes moved to Tucker, who was watching through the fog of pain and fever. "I owe him the debt of respect," Haken said simply. "He has treated me as a man, not as an animal. That is a rare thing in this place." Bull McKenna looked up from his preparations. "Victor, let him try. What we know might not be enough. If the Apache has better medicine, we would be fools not to use it." For a long moment, Victor Rafferty stood frozen, the weight of decision visible in every line of his weathered face. Finally, he stepped back and gestured toward his son. "Save him," he said to Huskin, his voice rough with emotion. "Save him, and you will have earned more than your freedom." Haken moved quickly to Tucker's side, kneeling beside the bed. He examined the wound carefully, then looked up at Bull. "I need certain plants," he said. "They grow in the canyon near the spring. Also, I need a knife, sharp and clean, and something to draw out the poison." Bull provided what was asked, and Haken set to work with a confidence that came from deep knowledge. He made small, precise cuts around the fang marks, different from what Bull had planned, positioned to maximize drainage without causing unnecessary damage. Then, without hesitation, he placed his mouth over the wound and began to suck out the poisoned blood, spitting it into a bowl Bull provided. The men watching were stunned into silence. Here was their captive, their enemy, risking his own life to save the son of the man who held him prisoner. Haken worked steadily, drawing out as much venom as possible, rinsing his mouth with whiskey between attempts. After several minutes, he sat back and called for the plants he had requested. A young gang member returned quickly with the vegetation Haken had described, and the Apache crushed them between his hands, mixing them with water to create a thick paste. He packed this around the wound, then bound it tightly with clean cloth. Tucker's breathing had eased slightly, though his face remained pale and drawn. The Apache looked up at Victor. "The venom is strong, but I have removed much of it. The medicine will help his body fight what remains. He needs water, rest, and time. If fever comes tonight, we must keep him cool. If he survives until dawn, he will likely recover fully." Victor Rafferty stared at the man who had just saved his son's life, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" he asked again. "Why would you do this?" Haken stood, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Because I am still a man," he said. "Because mercy is not weakness, as you believe. It is the greatest strength of all." The night fell heavy over the canyon as Tucker Rafferty fought the poison coursing through his veins. Haken remained at his bedside, despite Victor's initial order that he return to his quarters. The Apache's presence tolerated only because Bull McKenna insisted that someone with knowledge of the treatment needed to monitor the patient through the critical hours. The small cabin became a vigil space, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the rough timber walls. Outside, the gang members spoke in hushed tones, their usual rowdiness subdued by the gravity of their leader's son lying near death. Tucker drifted in and out of consciousness, his body racked with fever as it fought the venom's effects. Haken sat cross-legged on the floor beside the bed, occasionally rising to check the poultices or to help Bull administer water when Tucker was lucid enough to drink. Victor Rafferty occupied a chair in the corner, his weathered face haggard with worry and sleeplessness. The outlaw leader watched the Apache with an expression that shifted between suspicion and reluctant gratitude, unable to reconcile his worldview with the reality of what he was witnessing. Around midnight, Tucker's condition worsened. His skin burned with fever, and he began to thrash in delirium, calling out words that made no sense. Haken immediately removed the blankets and called for cool water and cloth. He showed Bull how to apply the wet compresses to Tucker's forehead, neck, and chest, explaining in his careful English that they must bring the fever down before it damaged the brain or heart. Victor watched as the Apache worked with steady competence, his movements precise and purposeful. The outlaw leader had spent his entire adult life viewing the Apache as enemies, as obstacles to be overcome or eliminated in the pursuit of survival and profit. Yet here was one of those enemies, working through the night to save his son's life, asking nothing in return. The cognitive dissonance was almost painful. As dawn approached, Tucker's fever finally broke. His breathing eased, and the grayish pallor began to fade from his skin. Haken checked the wound one final time, noting with satisfaction that the swelling had reduced considerably, and there were no signs of the streaking that would indicate the poison was still spreading. He prepared a fresh poultice from the remaining plants and applied it carefully before sitting back with visible exhaustion. Bull McKenna placed a hand on the Apache's shoulder. "You saved his life," he said simply. "There's no doubt of that." Victor Rafferty stood and walked to where Haken sat. The outlaw leader's face was a battlefield of emotions he seemed ill-equipped to process. He opened his mouth several times as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally, he managed a gruff acknowledgement. "You have done what you said you would do. When my son is fully recovered, we will speak of your freedom." Haken nodded once but said nothing. He understood that such promises were fragile things in a world governed by violence and self-interest. Victor left the cabin, and Bull soon followed, leaving Haken alone with the sleeping Tucker. The Apache allowed himself a moment of rest, leaning back against the wall and closing his eyes. He had risked his own life by drawing out the venom. Any break in his mouth or throat could have allowed the poison to enter his own bloodstream. But the risk had been worth taking, not just for the possibility of freedom, but for reasons he was still examining in his own heart. Tucker woke fully as morning sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window. His mouth was dry as desert sand, and his left arm throbbed with a deep ache, but the searing pain of the venom was gone. He turned his head slowly and saw Haken sitting against the wall, apparently asleep, but with the alertness of a man who never fully relinquished vigilance. As if sensing Tucker's gaze, the Apache's eyes opened. "You are awake," Haken said, rising smoothly to his feet despite the long night. "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a horse," Tucker croaked, then managed a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." Haken brought water and helped Tucker drink, supporting his head with surprising gentleness. "You must rest for several more days," the Apache said. "The venom is gone, but your body needs time to recover its strength. You will be weak, and the wound will pain you for some time." Tucker studied the man who had saved his life, seeing him with new clarity. "Why did you do it?" he asked, echoing his father's question. "You could have let me die. No one would have blamed you. We are your captors, your enemies." Haken was silent for a long moment, considering his response. "Among my people, we have a saying," he finally replied. "A man's worth is not measured by the enemies he kills, but by the lives he chooses to save when he could choose otherwise. You treated me with respect when you did not have to. That created a debt. I never asked for such a debt," Tucker said. "The best debts are never asked for," Haken responded. "They simply exist, like water flowing downhill. To ignore them is to deny one's own humanity." Over the next 3 days, Tucker's recovery progressed steadily. Haken prepared medicines and supervised his care with Bull's assistance, and the two men developed an unlikely rapport based on mutual respect for practical knowledge. The gang members watched this development with mixed reactions. Some saw it as weakness, their leader's son being tended by their prisoner. Others, particularly the older men who had survived through pragmatism rather than bravado, recognized the Apache's value and wondered if perhaps their treatment of him should be reconsidered. Victor Rafferty kept his distance, consumed by the planning of the stagecoach raid that Tucker had been meant to lead. With his son incapacitated, the responsibility fell to Jacob Marsh, Victor's second in command, a man whose competence was matched only by his ambition. Marsh assembled a crew of 8 men and rode out on the 4th morning after Tucker's injury, leaving the canyon with plans to intercept the stagecoach at a narrow pass 20 miles to the east. Tucker was finally able to leave his bed on the 5th day, though he remained weak and unsteady. He found Haken at the corral, working with one of the horses that had developed a limp. The Apache had his back to Tucker, focused entirely on examining the animal's leg with patient thoroughness. "You have a gift with animals," Tucker observed, approaching slowly. Haken glanced over his shoulder. "Animals respond to respect and patience, much like people. This one has a stone bruise, nothing serious, but it will need rest." Tucker leaned against the corral fence, grateful for the support. "I owe you my life," he said bluntly. "That is not a debt I take lightly." "Then do not take it as a debt at all," Haken replied, releasing the horse's leg and straightening. "Take it as a gift freely given, which requires no repayment." "Everything requires repayment in this world," Tucker said. "My father taught me that. Your father has taught you many things," Haken said carefully. "Not all of them are true." The statement hung between them, neither accusation nor judgment, simply an observation. Tucker found he could not argue with it. He had been thinking much the same thing during his fevered hours, reviewing his life and the choices that had brought him to this moment. The outlaw existence that had once seemed like freedom now felt increasingly like a prison of a different sort. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of riders approaching fast through the canyon entrance. Tucker straightened, alarm cutting through his weakness. The riders were coming too quickly, and he counted only 5 horses when 8 men had left with Marsh. Something had gone badly wrong. The returning outlaws were a study in disaster. 2 men were wounded, one bleeding heavily from a shoulder wound, the other with his arm bound in a crude sling. Their horses were lathered with sweat, and the men's faces were tight with fear and anger. Victor Rafferty emerged from the main building, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "What happened?" he demanded as the men dismounted. Jacob Marsh, his face pale beneath the trail dust, delivered the news. "It was a trap," he said. "The law knew we were coming. They had men positioned in the rocks above the pass. We lost Peterson and Davies in the first volley, and they chased us for 10 miles before we lost them." "How could they have known?" Victor's voice was dangerously quiet. "I do not know," Marsh replied, "but someone talked. Someone told them our plans." The accusation sparked immediate paranoia among the assembled gang members. Men began eyeing each other with suspicion, old grudges and new resentments bubbling to the surface. Tucker watched his father struggle to maintain control, knowing that a gang divided by mistrust would tear itself apart faster than any lawman could destroy it. Victor's gaze swept across his men and landed on Haken, who stood quietly beside the corral. The Apache met his stare without flinching, understanding immediately where the outlaw leader's thoughts were heading. "The prisoner," one of Marsh's men said, voicing what others were thinking. "He must have gotten word out somehow, warned the law about our plans." Haken did not leave the camp, Bull McKenna interjected firmly. "I had eyes on him the whole time you were gone." "Maybe he had help," another man suggested. "Maybe one of us is working with him." The situation was deteriorating rapidly, fear and anger combining into a volatile mixture that could explode into violence at any moment. Tucker pushed away from the corral fence, his weakness forgotten in the urgent need to prevent what he saw coming. "Stop," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of his father's son despite his weakened state. Haken could not have warned anyone. He has been here in camp, and he had no way of knowing our plans. The law has been hunting us for months. It is just as likely they stumbled onto the right place at the right time. Jacob Marsh rounded on Tucker with barely concealed contempt. Your judgment is compromised, he said. The savage saved your life, and now you cannot see him clearly. He is Apache. They are cunning and treacherous by nature. He is a man, Tucker shot back, his voice hardening. No more or less treacherous than any of us. And I will not stand by while you turn him into a scapegoat for your own failure. The confrontation between Tucker and Marsh attracted every eye in camp.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Victor Rafferty watched his son with an unreadable expression, saying nothing but clearly calculating the implications of this open challenge to his second-in-command. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring, waiting for someone to make a move that would determine what happened next. Haken remained motionless, his face impassive, but his eyes tracked every man present, measuring distances and angles with the practiced assessment of a warrior who might need to fight for his life at any second. He understood that he had become the focal point for the gang's fear and frustration, a convenient target for emotions that had nowhere else to go. Finally, Victor Rafferty spoke, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere like a blade. No one touches the Apache, he commanded. My son is right. We have no proof of betrayal, and I will not have this gang tear itself apart over suspicions. He fixed Jacob Marsh with a hard stare. You failed today, Jacob. That is the truth of it. Accept it, learn from it, and move on. Marsh's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly and turned away, his humiliation complete. The other men began to disperse, the immediate crisis diffused, but the underlying tensions far from resolved. Tucker felt the last of his strength draining away and swayed slightly. Haken moved quickly to his side, supporting him with a hand under his elbow. You should be resting, the Apache said quietly. I could not let them blame you for something you did not do. Tucker replied as they walked slowly toward his cabin. You have made an enemy in Jacob Marsh, Haken observed. He will not forget this public challenge. Tucker managed a tired smile. Then he will have to stand in line behind the lawmen, the territorial marshals, and about half the population of Texas. Inside the cabin, Tucker collapsed onto his bed, the brief exertion having cost him dearly. Haken fetched water and checked the wound, which was healing well but still tender. As he worked, Tucker studied the Apache's face, seeing in its strong lines a character that he had rarely encountered in his world of outlaws and opportunists. Haken, Tucker said as the Apache prepared to leave. When my father grants your freedom, as I believe he will, what will you do? Where will you go? The Apache paused at the door. I will return to my people, if they still live in the places I remember. And if they do not, I will find them wherever they have gone. A man belongs with his people, and if your people do not want you back, Tucker asked. If too much time has passed, if they believe you shamed by capture, Haken turned back, his dark eyes reflecting lamplight. Then I will make a new life, as all men must when the old one is taken from them. We are more than our circumstances, Tucker Rafferty. We are the choices we make when circumstances force us to choose. After Haken left, Tucker lay in the darkness thinking about choices and consequences, about the life he had been born into and the life he might choose if given the chance. The Copperhead's venom had nearly killed him, but in a strange way. It had also awakened something that had been sleeping inside him. A question about whether there might be another path, another way to live that did not require constant running and violence and the slow erosion of anything resembling honor. The following morning brought new complications. A rider arrived at dawn with news that a marshal's posse was working its way through the territory, following leads on the Rafferty gang's whereabouts. They were still 3 days away, perhaps 4, but they were coming with determination and numbers that the depleted gang would struggle to match in a straight fight. Victor called a council of his senior men to discuss their options. They could abandon the canyon hideout and move deeper into the Badlands, but that would mean leaving behind supplies and equipment they could not easily replace. They could stand and fight, but the recent losses and injuries had weakened them considerably. Or they could split up, scatter across the territory, and regroup later at a predetermined location. Tucker attended the council despite his weakness, knowing his voice carried weight even if his body did not yet have full strength. He listened as the men argued, each proposing solutions that served their own interests as much as the gang's survival. Jacob Marsh pushed for standing and fighting, clearly hoping to redeem his earlier failure with a victory. Others advocated for scattering, seeing it as the safest option for individual survival. "What does the Apache say?" one of the older outlaws asked suddenly. "He knows this country better than any of us." The suggestion was met with hostile looks from some, but Victor surprised everyone by nodding. "Bring him in," he ordered when Haken was escorted into the council. He showed no sign of intimidation despite being surrounded by armed men who had every reason to view him as an enemy. Victor explained the situation and asked directly, "If you were us, what would you do?" Haken considered the question seriously. "This canyon is a trap if they find it," he said. "One way in, one way out. If the marshal comes with many men, you will die here." He paused, then continued, "But if you abandon it, you lose your stronghold and become prey in open country. Neither choice is good. Then what do you suggest?" Victor pressed. "I suggest a third choice," Haken replied. "Use the canyon as bait, but do not be in it when the trap closes. Leave signs that you are here, keep fires burning, but move your camp to the high country beyond the North Ridge. Watch and wait. If the marshal comes and finds the canyon empty, he will search the surrounding area, and you can harass his men from the high ground until he gives up and leaves." The strategy was sound, and several men nodded in recognition of its tactical merit. Jacob Marsh, however, scoffed openly. "Take advice from a savage who was captured, because his own people were not clever enough to avoid it," he said. "This is foolishness." Haken turned to face Marsh directly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I was captured because I chose to draw the soldiers away from women and children who could not defend themselves," he said. "I could have escaped, but that would have meant their death. So I stayed and fought until I was taken. That is not lack of cleverness, that is honor, something you would not recognize." The insult hit its mark, and Marsh's hand moved toward his gun. Tucker was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between the two men despite the pain it cost him. "Enough," he said firmly. "We are not here to settle personal grievances. We are here to survive." Victor studied his son with an expression that might have been pride or concern or both. Then he made his decision. "We will do as the Apache suggests," he announced. "Begin preparations immediately. We move the camp tonight." The council disbanded with men rushing to follow orders, but Haken remained behind when Victor gestured for him to stay. The outlaw leader approached the Apache, and for a long moment, the two men simply regarded each other across a gulf of culture and experience. "You have given us good counsel," Victor said finally, "and you saved my son's life. These are debts that must be acknowledged." He paused, working through words that clearly did not come easily. "When we are settled in the new camp and the danger has passed, you will be free to go. You have earned your liberty." Haken inclined his head in acknowledgement, but did not smile or show relief. "Thank you," he said simply. "I will remember your honor in keeping this promise." After Victor left, Tucker approached Haken with a troubled expression. "You will truly leave when the time comes?" he asked. "Of course," Haken replied. "I have been away from my people too long already." Tucker wanted to say something more, to express the strange sense of loss he felt at the prospect of Haken's departure, but the words would not come. Instead, he simply nodded and turned away, wondering why the thought of this man's freedom felt less like victory and more like impending absence. That night, the gang worked by moonlight to relocate their camp to the high country, as Haken had suggested. They left fires burning in the canyon and arranged blankets and supplies to suggest ongoing occupation. It was exhausting work made more difficult by the need for silence and the rough terrain they had to cross in darkness. Tucker pushed himself despite his lingering weakness, refusing to be carried or coddled. Haken worked alongside the others, his knowledge of the landscape proving invaluable as he guided them through passages that would have been nearly impossible to find in the dark. By dawn, they were established in a new position on a mesa that overlooked the canyon from the north. It was exposed and uncomfortable, with little shelter from wind or sun, but it provided clear sightlines in all directions and multiple escape routes. The men were exhausted but satisfied with the tactical advantage they had gained, as Tucker finally allowed himself to rest. Sitting with his back against a boulder and his wounded arm cradled carefully, Haken settled nearby. The Apache was working on a new pair of moccasins, his hands moving with practiced skill as he shaped the leather. "You are a good teacher," Tucker said after a while. "You taught us how to survive this threat. I taught you one way to survive one threat," Haken corrected. "There will always be others. The question is whether you truly wish to continue living this way, always running, always fighting." Tucker had no answer to that question, at least none he was ready to speak aloud. But as the sun climbed higher and the day's heat began to build, he found himself thinking about paths not taken and choices not yet made, and wondering if perhaps the Copperhead's bite had been the beginning of something more than just a brush with death. 3 days passed on the high mesa with no sign of the marshal's posse, and the men grew restless in their exposed position. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, and the nights brought cold winds that cut through their thin blankets. Supplies were running low, and tempers grew short as the waiting dragged on. Tucker's strength had returned considerably, though his left arm still ached when he overused it, a constant reminder of how close he had come to death on the 4th morning. The lookout spotted riders approaching the canyon from the east. Victor gathered his men at the mesa's edge where they could observe without being seen. Through a battered spyglass, they watched as a group of 15 lawmen entered the canyon cautiously, their rifles ready and their movements disciplined. At their head rode a man wearing a marshal's star, his gray beard and confident bearing marking him as someone who had survived many such confrontations. "That is Marshal Thomas Garrett," Bull McKenna whispered to Tucker. "I have heard of him. 20 years tracking outlaws across 3 territories. And he has never given up a hunt." The lawmen spread through the abandoned camp systematically, searching every structure and examining the cold fire pits. Even from a distance, Tucker could see the moment when the marshal realized he had been deceived. The older man stood motionless for a long moment, then turned slowly, surveying the surrounding terrain with the careful attention of a predator who knows his prey is watching. "He knows we are still here," Haken said quietly from where he crouched beside Tucker. "He is clever, this one. He will not leave until he finds us or we make a mistake." Victor lowered the spyglass with a grim expression. "We cannot stay up here much longer without water and proper supplies. And he has enough men to search these hills for weeks if he chooses. Then we give him something else to chase," Jacob Marsh said, his voice eager with the prospect of action. "A small group leads them away while the rest circle back for the supplies we need." "That is exactly what he will expect," Haken interjected. "He will split his force to follow any group that breaks away, and then he will have you divided and easier to defeat." Marsh glared at the Apache with undisguised hostility. "Then what would you suggest, Savage, since you seem to have all the answers?" "I suggest patience," Haken replied calmly. "Watch and wait. The marshal has supplies for perhaps 10 days, no more. If we give him nothing to chase, he will eventually have to leave. We can survive longer up here than he can survive down there." The strategy went against every instinct the outlaws possessed. Men of action forced into an action, but Victor recognized the wisdom in it. "We wait," he decided, ignoring Marsh's disgusted expression. "Ration the water, hunt only what we can kill silently, and keep constant watch. No fires, no unnecessary movement." The following days tested the gang's discipline in ways that gunfights never had. They watched helplessly as the marshal's men methodically searched the canyon and the immediate surroundings, coming within 100 yards of the mesa on 2 occasions. Each time, the outlaws remained absolutely still, barely breathing, while Hakan's knowledge of concealment and natural camouflage kept them hidden from the lawman's eyes. Tucker found himself spending more time with Hakan during these long hours of forced idleness. They would sit in whatever shade they could find, speaking in low voices about subjects that ranged far beyond their immediate circumstances. Hakan told stories of his people's ways, their relationship with the land, their understanding of survival that went deeper than mere physical endurance. Tucker, in turn, found himself sharing things he had never spoken of before. His memories of his mother, his doubts about the outlaw life, his growing sense that there should be more to existence than constant running and violence. One evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of crimson and gold, Tucker asked the question that had been building in him for days. "When you are free, would you consider staying, not as a prisoner, but as one of us?" Hakan was silent for a long time, his dark eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Finally, he spoke with careful honesty. "I am honored that you would ask, but I cannot be one of you. Your way is not my way. You take from others to survive. My people take only what the land provides and what we can trade fairly for. You run from the law. We run from those who would destroy us. The reasons are different, and that difference matters. But you have seen that not all of us are without honor," Tucker pressed. "You have seen that some of us try to live by a code, even if it is not the same as yours." "I have seen that you try," Hakan agreed. "And I have seen that your father keeps his word, which is more than many white men do. But trying is not the same as succeeding," Tucker Rafferty. "Your life here will end in blood, either your own or others, and I do not wish to be part of that ending." The words stung because they rang with truth. Tucker had no argument to counter them, no defense that would not sound hollow even to his own ears. He sat in silence as darkness fell, wrestling with thoughts that he could not quite bring into focus. On the 8th day, the marshal's patience finally broke. The lawmen began preparing to leave, packing their gear and readying their horses. Victor watched through the spyglass with satisfaction, believing his strategy had worked. But Hakan's expression remained troubled, and when Tucker asked what concerned him, the Apache pointed to a small group of 4 men who were not preparing to leave with the others. "They stay behind to watch," Hakan explained. "When we return to the canyon for our supplies, they will follow us and bring the others back." "It is a good tactic," Victor cursed when this was explained to him. "Then we cannot go back at all," he said. "We will have to abandon everything and find a new territory, or we deal with the 4 watchers," Jacob Marsh suggested with a predatory smile. "4 men we can handle quietly," Hakan shook his head. "If the watchers do not report back, the marshal will know what happened and return with even more men. You will trade a small problem for a larger one." The debate continued as the main body of lawmen rode out of the canyon, leaving their 4 companions hidden among the rocks. Tucker watched his father struggle with a decision that had no good options, only choices between different degrees of risk. Finally, Victor made his choice with the ruthless pragmatism that had kept him alive for so many years. "We take what we can carry tonight and abandon the rest," he announced. "We move south into New Mexico territory and start fresh. It is better to lose supplies than to lose our lives." The decision was met with grumbling, but no open resistance. The men began sorting through their possessions, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. Tucker noticed that several of the younger gang members kept glancing at Hakan, their expressions suggesting that they blamed the Apache for their current predicament, despite the lack of any logical connection. That night, as the gang prepared for their departure under cover of darkness, Tucker sought out Hucken one final time. His father had confirmed that the Apache would be released as promised, given a horse and supplies, and allowed to ride away into the night. It should have felt like a victory, the honorable conclusion to an unlikely alliance, but Tucker felt only a hollow sadness. "I wanted to thank you again," Tucker said awkwardly. "For saving my life, for your counsel, for treating me as a man worth saving." "You are a man worth saving," Hucken replied. "That is why it troubles me to know you will likely die in this life you have chosen. You have intelligence, courage, and a sense of honor that your circumstances have not completely destroyed. These are rare qualities, and they will be wasted when some lawman's bullet finds you in a place like this." "What choice do I have?" Tucker asked with genuine frustration. "This is the only life I know, the only family I have. I cannot simply walk away from everything. Can you not?" Haken challenged. "Or will you not? There is a difference, and it is the difference between a man who is trapped and a man who chooses his own chains." Before Tucker could respond, a shout of alarm cut through the night. One of the sentries had spotted movement in the rocks below, torches appearing where the 4 watchers had been hidden. But these were not 4 men. They were more, many more. The marshal had never truly left. He had simply moved his main force out of sight and waited for the outlaws to reveal their position. "Trap," Victor roared. "Mount up, we ride now." Chaos erupted as the gang scrambled for their horses. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the lawmen closed in, having surrounded the mesa during the night. Men fell wounded or dead in the first volley, and the outlaws returned fire desperately while trying to reach their mounts. Tucker grabbed his rifle with his good arm and fired at muzzle flashes in the darkness, his heart pounding with the familiar terror of combat. Haken appeared at his side, weaponless but calm. "You must go now," the Apache said urgently. "Take your horse and ride for the southern pass. It is your only chance. Come with me," Tucker shouted over the gunfire. "You will die if you stay here. I am already free." Haken replied with something that might have been a smile. "Your father released me an hour ago. I have no part in this fight." "But you do, so go before it is too late." Tucker hesitated for only a moment, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "Then I am coming with you," he said. "I am done with this life, done with running and killing and waiting to die. If you will have me as a companion, I choose to ride with you instead." Hucken's eyes widened in genuine shock. "You do not know what you are saying. The heat of battle." "I know exactly what I am saying," Tucker interrupted. "I have been thinking of little else for days. You were right. I am choosing my own chains every day I stay with this gang. Well, today I choose differently." A bullet struck the rock near Tucker's head, and Hucken grabbed his arm. "We can discuss this if we survive," he said. "Now we must move." Together, they ran for the horses while the battle raged around them. Tucker saw his father rallying the men for a breakout charge, saw Jacob Marsh take a bullet to the leg and go down cursing. He felt a pang of guilt at abandoning his father in this moment of crisis. But he also felt something else, a lightness, as if a weight he had carried his entire life was suddenly lifted. They reached the horses and mounted quickly. Hucken led the way through a narrow defile that Tucker had not even noticed before, a path that took them away from the main fighting and toward the southern edge of the mesa. Behind them, the gunfire reached a crescendo as the outlaws made their desperate charge to break through the marshal's lines. They rode hard through the darkness, putting distance between themselves and the battle. Tucker did not look back, did not allow himself to think about what he was leaving behind. He focused only on following Haken through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate without the Apache's intimate knowledge of the land. Dawn found them 20 miles south, hiding in a grove of cottonwoods near a shallow creek. They had heard no sounds of pursuit, which could mean they had escaped cleanly, or that the marshal was occupied with capturing or killing the rest of the gang. Tucker did not know which possibility troubled him more. Haken studied Tucker across their small campfire, his expression serious. "You have made a choice that cannot be unmade," he said. "If your father survived, he will consider you a deserter. If the law heard of what you did, it will still hunt you for your past crimes. You have not escaped your old life, Tucker Rafferty. You have only made it more complicated." Tucker nodded, accepting the truth of this assessment. "I understand," he said. "But I could not stay, not after seeing another way through your example. You said a man's worth is measured by the lives he chooses to save when he could choose otherwise. I want to learn to live by that principle instead of the one my father taught me. It will not be easy," Haken warned. "My people may not accept you, a white man who rode with outlaws. And you will have to prove yourself through actions, not just words. Then I will prove myself," Tucker said with quiet determination. "I am good with horses, good with my hands, and I am willing to learn whatever else is needed. I do not expect acceptance or comfort. I expect only the chance to become something better than what I was." Haken was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "We will ride to find my people together. But understand this, if you betray my trust or bring harm to my band, I will kill you myself without hesitation." "I would expect nothing less," Tucker replied. They rested for a few hours, then continued south, moving through country that grew increasingly harsh and beautiful. Haken taught as they traveled, pointing out plants that could be eaten or used for medicine, showing Tucker how to read the land for water and game, explaining the Apache way of moving through the world with minimal impact and maximum awareness. Tucker absorbed it all with the intensity of a man who knows he is being given a second chance at life itself. On the third day, they encountered a small band of Mexican traders heading north with goods to sell in the New Mexico settlements. Haken negotiated in Spanish, trading Tucker's rifle and some ammunition for dried meat, beans, and 2 good blankets. The Mexicans eyed Tucker with suspicion, clearly recognizing him as a gringo and possibly an outlaw. But they took the deal and moved on without causing trouble. As they made camp that night, Tucker asked the question that had been building in him since they had fled the mesa. "Do you think my father survived the battle?" Haken added wood to their small fire before answering. "Your father is a survivor," he said carefully. "If any of the gang escaped, he would have been among them. But even if he lived, the gang as you knew it is finished. Too many losses, too much attention from the law. He will have to start over or retire. And I do not think Victor Rafferty knows how to retire." Tucker stared into the flames, feeling a complex mixture of grief, guilt, and relief. Part of him hoped his father had survived, while another part recognized that his father's death might be the only thing that would truly free him from the pull of his old life. The following week brought them deeper into Apache territory. Though the land was so vast and the Apache so scattered that they saw no sign of Haken's people. They survived on what they could hunt and gather, and Tucker's skills improved daily under Haken's patient instruction. He learned to move quietly, to read tracks, to understand the language of birds and animals that signaled danger or opportunity. It was a different kind of education than the one his father had provided. But Tucker found it far more satisfying one evening. As they sat watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple, Haken spoke of his own past. He told Tucker about his wife, killed in a raid by Mexican soldiers 3 years earlier, and his 2 children, taken by disease during a winter of starvation. He spoke of the slow destruction of his people, pushed from their traditional lands, forced to fight for survival against enemies with superior weapons and endless numbers. His voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity, but Tucker heard the deep pain beneath the words. "I am sorry for your losses," Tucker said quietly. "No man should have to endure such grief. All men endure grief," Haken replied. "It is the price we pay for love and connection. The question is whether grief destroys us or teaches us." I choose to let it teach me, to let it make me more compassionate rather than more cruel. Tucker thought about his own losses, his mother's death, the childhood he had never really had, the life of honor and purpose he might have lived if circumstances had been different. For the first time, he considered that perhaps those losses did not have to define him, that perhaps he could choose, as Haken had, to let them teach rather than destroy. On the 10th day, they encountered signs that they were approaching an Apache settlement. Haken read the markers that Tucker could not even see. Broken twigs arranged in specific patterns, stones placed just so. Scratches on tree bark that looked random, but conveyed information to those who knew how to read them. They were being watched, Haken explained. His people's scouts assessing whether they were friends or threats. That night, they were approached in their camp by 3 Apache warriors who appeared so silently that Tucker nearly jumped for his gun before Haken's calming gesture stopped him. The warriors spoke rapidly in their language with Haken, their eyes constantly moving to assess Tucker. The conversation seemed tense, and Tucker caught his own name mentioned several times. Finally, Haken turned to him with a serious expression. "They know who you are," he said.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Word has spread through the trading networks about the Rafferty gang and the son who rode with them. My people are debating whether to kill you, send you away, or allow you to approach the camp. What did you tell them? Tucker asked, keeping his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. I told them you saved my life by speaking for me when your people wanted to blame me for their troubles, Haken said. I told them you abandoned your family and your past to seek a better way. I told them you deserve the chance to prove yourself, just as I was given a chance by you. And what did they say? Tucker asked. They said we will see. Haken replied with a slight smile. Among my people, that is the beginning of possibility. The warriors led them through the darkness to a camp hidden in a canyon so cunningly concealed that Tucker would have ridden past it a dozen times without noticing. As they entered the settlement, Tucker felt dozens of eyes upon him, weighing him, judging him, wondering if he was a threat or a curiosity or something else entirely. Children stopped playing to stare. Women paused in their work to watch him pass. Warriors stood with hands near weapons, ready to act if he made any threatening move. Haken led him to the center of the camp where an older man sat before a fire, his weathered face reflecting firelight and wisdom earned through decades of survival. This was Knelt, the band's leader, and Tucker knew instantly that his fate would be decided here, in this moment, by this man who had every reason to hate all white men and everything they represented. Haken spoke at length in Apache, gesturing occasionally toward Tucker, but mostly keeping his attention on the elder. Tucker stood silently, maintaining a respectful posture, but meeting Knelt's gaze when the old man looked at him. He would not beg or grovel. He would simply be himself and accept whatever judgment came. Finally, Knelt spoke in careful English. Haken tells me you seek to leave your people's way and learn ours, he said. This is not a small thing. Our way is difficult, and you will always be marked as an outsider. Why would you choose such a path? Tucker chose his words carefully. Because I have lived among men who take what they want without thought for others, and I have seen where that path leads, he said. Because Haken showed me that strength can exist alongside mercy, that survival does not require cruelty. Because I want to become a man worth the life that was saved when Haken drew the poison from my veins. Knelt nodded slowly. Pretty words, he said. But words mean nothing without actions to support them. You will stay with us for 1 full moon. You will work, you will learn, and you will be watched every moment. At the end of that time, we will decide if you may remain or if you must leave. And if you betray us in any way, if you bring danger to my people, you will die. Do you accept these terms? I accept them, Tucker said without hesitation. Then you are no longer Tucker Rafferty, son of outlaws, Nantaj pronounced. You are Shah Desi, Shadow Walker, a man between two worlds. Whether you find your place in ours remains to be seen. The first moon cycle among the Apache tested Tucker in ways that gunfights and outlaw raids never had. The physical labor was relentless, hauling water from distant springs, gathering firewood from increasingly sparse groves, helping to construct new shelters as the band prepared for the coming winter. But the harder challenge was earning trust from people who had every reason to view him with suspicion and hostility. Every action was scrutinized, every word weighed for hidden meaning, every gesture examined for signs of deception or threat. Haken remained his only true ally during those early weeks. Though even the Apache warrior maintained a certain distance in public, unwilling to show favoritism that might undermine Tucker's need to prove himself independently. In private moments, usually during the evening meal, or while working side by side on some task, Haken would offer quiet guidance, explaining customs Tucker had unknowingly violated or warning him about individuals who were particularly hostile to his presence. There was Goyen, a warrior whose younger brother had been killed by white settlers, who never missed an opportunity to assign Tucker the most difficult or demeaning tasks. There was Isti, a woman who had lost her husband to Mexican soldiers and viewed all outsiders as enemies waiting to betray them. And there was Kosheta, Nantaj's nephew, a proud young warrior who seemed to resent Tucker's presence as a personal insult to Apache dignity. Tucker endured their hostility without complaint, understanding that words would not change their minds. He worked harder than required, volunteering for tasks others avoided. And he made a conscious effort to learn the Apache language with the help of the few children who found his attempts at pronunciation amusing rather than offensive. Slowly, imperceptibly, some attitudes began to shift one afternoon. While Tucker was repairing a torn water skin using techniques Haken had taught him, an elderly woman approached. Her name was Nalin, and she was regarded as one of the band's wisest members, a keeper of stories and traditions. She watched him work in silence for several minutes, her weathered face revealing nothing of her thoughts. "You use the double stitch," she observed finally in halting English. "Haken has taught you well. He is a patient teacher," Tucker replied, keeping his attention on his work, but aware of the significance of this interaction. Nalin rarely spoke to anyone outside her immediate family. She settled onto a nearby rock with the careful movements of age. "My grandson died in the winter of deep snows," she said without preamble. "He was learning to hunt, only 12 summers, but eager to become a warrior. He pursued a deer onto a frozen lake, and the ice broke beneath him. By the time we pulled him from the water, the cold had already claimed his spirit." Tucker paused in his work, uncertain how to respond to this confidence. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. Nalin waved away the sympathy. "I do not tell you this for pity," she said. "I tell you because you remind me of him, not in appearance, but in the way you approach each task as if your life depends on mastering it. He had that same intensity, that same hunger to prove himself worthy. I am trying to honor the second chance I have been given," Tucker explained. The old woman nodded. "Haken has told me of the Copperhead bite, how close you came to crossing over to the spirit world. Such experiences change a man if he is wise enough to let them." She fixed him with a penetrating stare. "But change is not the same as transformation. You have changed your circumstances, Tucker Rafferty, but have you transformed your spirit?" The question struck deeper than any physical challenge he had faced. Tucker set down the water skin and met her gaze directly. "I do not know yet," he admitted. "I am trying, but I do not know if trying is enough. Trying is the beginning," Nalin said. "Transformation comes when trying becomes being, when the new way is no longer effort but nature. You are not there yet, but you walk the path. That is more than many achieve." She rose and shuffled away, leaving Tucker with her words echoing in his mind. That evening, as he sat at the edge of the camp watching the stars emerge, Hakan joined him with 2 bowls of stew. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Tucker spoke. "Nalin talked to me today," he said. "Asked me questions I did not know how to answer. She does that," Hakan replied with a hint of amusement. "She sees more deeply than most, and she asks questions that force you to see yourself clearly." "What did she want to know? Whether I had truly transformed or only changed my circumstances," Tucker said. "I told her I did not know." "That was an honest answer," Hakan observed. "And honesty is the foundation of transformation. If you had claimed to be fully changed after only a few weeks, she would have known you were lying to yourself. Do you think I can do it?" Tucker asked. "Truly become someone different than who I was?" Hakan considered this carefully. "I think you can become who you were always meant to be before circumstances shaped you into someone else," he said. "That is not the same as becoming a different person. It is more like removing layers of stone to reveal the true shape beneath. The question is whether you have the courage to let go of everything you thought defined you." "I have already let go of my father, my gang, everything I knew," Tucker pointed out. "No," Hakan corrected gently. "You have physically separated yourself from those things, but you have not let them go in your heart. I see it in your eyes when you think no one is watching. The guilt about leaving your father during the battle. The worry about what happened to the men you rode with. The fear that you are betraying something essential by choosing this path. Until you release those bonds, you will remain divided." "How do I release them?" Tucker asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "That is something only you can discover," Hakan said. "For some, it happens through ceremony. For others, through time and new experiences. For still others, through a single moment of clarity that cannot be predicted or forced. Be patient with yourself, Tucker Rafferty. Transformation is not a destination, but a journey, and you have only just begun." The following week brought an unexpected development. A Mexican trader named Esteban arrived at the camp with goods to exchange, but also with news that sent ripples of alarm through the band. He reported that Marshal Garrett had indeed captured several members of the Rafferty gang after the battle on the mesa, but that Victor Rafferty himself had escaped along with 3 other men. More significantly, the Marshal was offering a substantial reward for information leading to the capture of Tucker Rafferty, who was now wanted not just for his past crimes, but for desertion and suspected murder of a fellow gang member during the escape. Tucker listened to this news with a sinking feeling in his stomach. The murder charge was fabricated. He had killed no one during the flight from the mesa. But the accusation would make him even more valuable to bounty hunters and lawmen, who might not care whether the charges were true. His presence in the Apache camp had just become significantly more dangerous for everyone. Nantage called an emergency council that evening, and Tucker was summoned to attend. The band's leaders sat in a circle around the fire, their faces grave as they debated what to do about this new threat. Cocheta argued forcefully that Tucker should be expelled immediately, that harboring him put the entire band at risk. Others agreed, pointing out that they had enough troubles without inviting the attention of lawmen and bounty hunters. Tucker stood before them, knowing that his fate hung in the balance. When Nantage asked if he had anything to say in his own defense, Tucker spoke with careful honesty. "I did not kill anyone during the escape," he said. "That charge is false, likely invented by someone who survived and wanted to deflect blame onto me. But I understand that my presence here creates danger for all of you. Danger you did not invite and do not deserve. If the council decides I must leave, I will go without protest or resentment." "And where would you go?" Nantage asked. "Back to your father, back to the outlaw life." "No," Tucker said firmly. "Never that. I would travel west, perhaps to California, and find work as a ranch hand or laborer under a different name. I would build a new life far from anyone who might recognize me." "Running and hiding," Cocheta said with contempt. "The white man's way. Always running from consequences." Tucker turned to face the young warrior directly. "You are right," he said. surprising everyone including himself. Running is the white man's way, or at least it has been my way. But I am trying to learn a different way, your way, which is to face difficulties with courage and wisdom rather than fleeing from them. So if the council wishes, I will stay and help defend this camp against any threat that comes. I may not be Apache by blood, but I can fight alongside you as a brother would. The offer hung in the air, and Tucker could see the calculation in the eyes around the fire. They were weighing his usefulness as a fighter against the danger his presence represented, measuring his sincerity against their deep-seated distrust of white men. Haken spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of personal testimony. When I was held captive by Tucker's people, he defended me when others would have used me as a scapegoat for their failures. He risked his father's anger and the hostility of his gang to speak truth. That took courage, and courage is something we value. I believe he has earned the right to stay and prove himself further. Nalin added her voice, unusual for a woman to speak in council, but accepted due to her age and wisdom. This one has the spirit of a seeker, she said. He has been given a vision of a different way to live, and he pursues it with genuine hunger. Our people have always adopted those who prove themselves worthy, regardless of their blood. Why should we abandon that tradition now out of fear? The debate continued for another hour, with arguments flowing back and forth like a tide. Finally, Nantage raised his hand for silence. We will put it to a test, he announced. 3 days from now, a hunting party will go into the mountains to track elk before the first snows drive them to lower ground. Tucker will accompany them, along with Hucken and 4 others including Cocheta. How he conducts himself on this hunt, whether he follows instructions, works with the group, and shows respect for our ways, will determine his fate. If he proves himself worthy, he may stay. If not, he must leave. Does anyone object to this solution? No one spoke, though Cocheta's expression made his skepticism clear. Tucker bowed his head in acknowledgement. I accept the council's wisdom, he said. I will do my best to prove myself worthy of your trust. The next 3 days were filled with preparation. Tucker worked alongside the hunting party members, checking weapons, preparing supplies, and receiving instruction on Apache hunting techniques that differed significantly from what he had learned in his outlaw days. Where white hunters might blast away at any target, the Apache practiced selective harvesting, taking only what was needed and offering prayers of thanks to the spirits of the animals they killed. Hucken explained the spiritual dimension of the hunt. We do not see ourselves as separate from the animals we hunt, he said. They are our relatives, and we take their lives only out of necessity, never for sport or waste. When you kill, if you are fortunate enough to make a kill, you must thank the elk spirit for its sacrifice and promise to use every part of its body. Nothing can be wasted. Tucker absorbed these teachings seriously, recognizing that the hunt was about far more than simply bringing back meat. It was a test of his ability to adopt not just the techniques, but the philosophy that underlay Apache survival. He spent time alone in meditation, trying to quiet his mind and open himself to the deeper lessons he needed to learn. On the morning of the hunt, the party set out before dawn, riding horses into the foothills and then continuing on foot as the terrain grew steeper. Besides Tucker, Haken, and Cocheta, the group included 2 experienced hunters named Kurik and Deklugi, and a younger man named Nate, who was on his first major hunt. Tucker noticed that Cocheta positioned himself near Nate, clearly taking responsibility for the young hunter's instruction. And he made a mental note to stay out of their way unless invited to help. They climbed for most of the morning, following signs that Kurik pointed out, but that Tucker could barely distinguish from the natural disorder of the forest floor. A bent twig here, a displacement of pine needles there, markings on tree bark that indicated an elk had rubbed its antlers. Gradually a picture emerged of where the herd had passed and where it might be heading, around midday. They reached a high meadow where fresh droppings and clearly visible tracks indicated the elk had been grazing recently, perhaps within the last few hours. Kuruk signaled for silence and spread the hunters out in a wide arc, positioning each man to block potential escape routes while leaving one corridor open where the elk might flee. But where they would be funneled toward the waiting hunters, Tucker found himself paired with Deklugi, a taciturn man who had shown him neither friendship nor hostility, but simple neutrality. They crouched behind a fallen log, their weapons ready, and waited with the infinite patience that successful hunting required. Time seemed to slow and stretch, each sound magnified, each movement of wind through the trees carrying potential meaning. After what might have been an hour or three, Tucker's patience was rewarded. A magnificent bull elk emerged from the tree line, its antlers spreading like the branches of a great tree. Behind it came several cows and younger animals, the whole herd moving cautiously but without panic into the meadow. Tucker's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain absolutely still, waiting for Kuruk's signal. The signal came as a soft bird call, one that Tucker had been taught to recognize. In coordinated movement, the hunters rose from concealment, driving the herd toward the open corridor where Haken and Kocheta waited. But the elk were not easily fooled, sensing the trap. The bull bellowed and attempted to break back through the line where Tucker and Deklugi stood. Tucker had one clear shot at the bull as it charged past, its eyes wild with fear and determination. Every instinct from his outlaw days screamed at him to take the shot, to bring down the largest and most impressive animal. But he remembered Haken's teaching about taking only what was needed, about not killing for sport or pride. The bull was magnificent, probably the herd's breeding male, and killing it would harm the herd's future. Instead, Tucker shifted his aim to a younger cow that ran behind the bull, an animal that would provide ample meat without devastating the herd's integrity. His arrow flew true, striking the cow behind the shoulder and penetrating to the heart. The animal stumbled and fell within 20 yards, dying quickly with minimal suffering. Tucker approached cautiously, aware that a wounded elk could be dangerous even in its final moments, but the animal was already gone. He knelt beside it and spoke the prayer Haken had taught him, thanking the elk's spirit for its sacrifice and promising to honor its death by using every part of its body. The other hunters converged on the site, and Tucker saw approval in several faces, including Deklugi's. Kocheta alone seemed disappointed, perhaps having hoped Tucker would fail this test. But even the skeptical young warrior could not deny that the kill had been clean, ethical, and well executed. Kuruk examined the arrow placement and nodded. "A good shot," he said simply. "Quick death, little suffering." They set about the work of field dressing the elk, and Tucker participated fully, learning the Apache method of butchering that maximized use of every part. The meat was carefully separated and packed. The hide was rolled for transport and future tanning. The bones were saved for tools and decorations. Even the sinews were preserved for binding and sewing. Nothing was wasted, nothing was taken lightly. As they worked, Nate approached Tucker shyly. "That was well done," the young man said in careful English. "I saw you had the bull in your sights but chose the cow instead. That showed wisdom. Haken taught me to think about the herd's future. Not just the immediate kill," Tucker explained, giving credit where it was due. "That is the difference between hunting and slaughter," Naish said. "Many white men never learn it." The statement was delivered without hostility, simply as an observation of fact. Tucker took it as such and continued his work. By the time they finished, the sun was lowering toward the western peaks, and Kuruk decided they would camp near the kill site rather than attempt to carry the meat down the mountain in darkness. That evening, as they sat around a small fire eating portions of the liver roasted on sticks, a traditional hunter's meal, Tucker felt something shift inside himself. He was participating in a ritual that stretched back countless generations, sharing food with men who had begun to see him as something other than an enemy or outsider. The conversation flowed around him in Apache with occasional translations from Hakan. Stories of past hunts and jokes about various hunters' mishaps. The easy camaraderie of men who trusted each other. Even Kosheta seemed to soften slightly, though he still watched Tucker with careful attention. "Tell me, Shadezi," the young warrior said, using Tucker's Apache name for the first time. "Why did you not take the bull? You had the shot." Tucker considered how to answer honestly. "Because Hakan taught me that a hunter's responsibility is to the herd as much as to his own needs," he said. "The bull was strong and healthy, likely to sire many more calves. Taking him would have been wasteful pride, not necessary hunting." Kocheta nodded slowly. "That is a good answer," he admitted. "But I wonder if you would have made the same choice before the Copperhead bit you. Before Hakan saved your life and changed your path." It was a perceptive question. And Tucker did not insult the young warrior with a quick or easy answer. "No," he said finally. "Before that day, I would have taken the bull without thought, because I was taught that a man proves himself by taking the biggest prize. I am learning a different way now, one that measures worth by wisdom rather than conquest. Learning and knowing are not the same," Kocheta observed. "But perhaps you are farther along the path than I credited. We will see what the council decides when we return." The following morning, they began the long journey back to camp, taking turns carrying the heavy loads of meat and hide. Tucker accepted his full share without complaint, finding a strange satisfaction in the physical labor that contributed to the band's survival. This was purpose of a different kind than anything he had known in his outlaw days. Not taking from others, but providing for a community. Not running from responsibility, but embracing it. When they finally reached the Apache camp, the successful hunt was greeted with celebration. Women emerged to take charge of the meat, already planning how to preserve it for winter. Children ran excitedly around the returning hunters, and even the usually stoic Nantej allowed himself a smile of satisfaction. Hakan caught Tucker's eye and gave a small nod of approval, a gesture that meant more than any elaborate praise. That evening, the council gathered once again to discuss Tucker's fate. This time, the debate was shorter and the outcome more certain. Keurig spoke first, describing Tucker's conduct during the hunt in terms that left no doubt about his approval. Daklugi added his support, noting Tucker's willingness to work hard and learn humbly. Even Kosheta, when his turn came, grudgingly admitted that Tucker had shown proper respect for Apache ways and wisdom in his actions. Nantej listened to all the testimony, then turned to Tucker with an expression that revealed nothing. "You came to us as Shadow Walker, a man between worlds," he said. "You have walked in those shadows for one full moon, learning our ways and proving your sincerity. The council has discussed your future, and we have reached a decision." Tucker stood straight, prepared to accept whatever judgment came. His heart pounded, but his face remained calm. He had done his best, and if it was not enough, he would leave with dignity and continue his journey alone. "You may stay with us through the winter," Nantej announced. "Not as a guest or temporary member, but as one who belongs, if you wish it. You will be expected to contribute fully to the band's welfare, to defend us if threats arise, and to continue learning our language and customs. At the end of winter, if you still wish to remain and we still wish to have you, you will undergo the full adoption ceremony and become Apache in every way that matters. Do you accept these terms?" Tucker felt emotions surge through him that he could barely name. Gratitude, relief, hope, and something deeper, a sense of finally finding a place where he belonged. "I accept with all my heart," he managed to say, his voice rough with feeling. "I will spend my life proving worthy of the trust you have placed in me." "Then it is settled," Nantej said. "Welcome, Chadezi, to your new family." The gathering dissolved into celebration, with people approaching to welcome Tucker properly now that his status was confirmed. Nalan brought him a bowl of stew and a warm blanket, practical gifts that spoke of acceptance. Nate grinned and clapped him on the shoulder, already treating him as a peer. Even Goyen, who had been among his harshest critics, gave him a curt nod that suggested grudging respect. Haken appeared at his side as the celebration continued. "You have done well, my friend," the Apache warrior said quietly. "I am proud to have played a part in your transformation. I could not have done it without you," Tucker replied honestly. "You saved my life twice, once from the venom and once from the emptiness of the life I was living." "We saved each other," Haken corrected. "You defended me when you could have stayed silent, and that act of courage began both our journeys to this moment. That is how it should be between friends, each making the other stronger." As the night deepened and the celebration finally wound down, Tucker found himself sitting alone for a moment, looking up at the stars that blazed overhead with impossible brightness. He thought about his father, wondered if Victor had survived, and what he thought of his son's desertion. He thought about the Copperhead whose venom had brought him to the edge of death and somehow opened a door to new life. And he thought about the long road ahead, the challenges and joys of fully becoming Shah Desi, while never forgetting Tucker Rafferty, integrating both identities into something new and whole. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Tucker smiled at the sound. He was home. Winter descended upon the Apache camp with a ferocity that tested even the most experienced members of the band. Snow fell in thick curtains across the mountains, and the temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in its containers overnight. Tucker threw himself into the work of survival with an intensity that surprised even those who had come to accept his presence. He helped reinforce shelters against the wind, gathered what firewood could be found in the increasingly barren landscape, and stood watch during the long frozen nights when danger from cold was as real as any human threat. The hardship created a strange intimacy among the band members, as shared suffering often does. Huddled together for warmth, working side by side to ensure everyone had enough food and fuel, the Apache began to see Tucker not as an outsider who had been permitted to stay, but as one of them who happened to have different origins. He learned their songs, their stories, their jokes, and their sorrows. He discovered that Cocheda had a gift for mimicry that could make even Nantage laugh until tears ran down his weathered face. He learned that Nalan had been a renowned warrior in her youth before age had slowed her body but sharpened her mind. He found that Isti, the woman who had lost her husband and initially despised his presence, was teaching her young daughter the old songs so they would not be forgotten. Haken remained his closest companion and trusted advisor, but their relationship had evolved from teacher and student into something approaching equality. They would sit together in the evenings, discussing philosophy and strategy, sharing observations about the band and the larger world beyond. Haken spoke of his concerns about the future, about how the Apache way of life was being systematically destroyed by the advance of Mexican and American settlement, about whether resistance or accommodation offered the better path to survival. Tucker listened carefully to these conversations, recognizing that his unique perspective, someone who had lived in both worlds, might eventually prove valuable in the depths of January, when food stores were running dangerously low and hunting was nearly impossible due to the deep snow. A crisis emerged that would test Tucker's commitment in ways he had not anticipated. A small child, the daughter of a family that had been kind to Tucker from his first days in camp, developed a severe fever. The band's healer tried every remedy in her extensive knowledge, but the fever would not break. The child, whose name was Kiona, grew weaker each day, her small body burning with an internal fire that no medicine seemed to touch. Tucker watched the parents' anguish with a heavy heart, knowing there was likely nothing he could do, but also unable to simply stand aside. He remembered his own brush with death from the Copperhead venom, remembered how Haken's knowledge and willingness to act had saved his life. Perhaps there was something he could contribute, some fragment of knowledge from his previous life that might help. He approached the healer, a formidable woman named Desba, with deep respect and careful humility. "I do not presume to know more than you," he said in his now fluent Apache. "But in my previous life, I sometimes saw white doctors treat fevers with a method you might not know. Would you permit me to describe it, in case it might help?" Desba studied him with keen intelligence, weighing pride against pragmatism. "The child is dying," she said bluntly. "If you know something that might save her, speak." Tucker explained a technique his mother had used once when he was very young and burning with fever. Submerging the body in progressively cooler water to bring down the temperature without shocking the system. It was risky, he admitted, and there was debate even among white doctors about its effectiveness. But when medicines failed, sometimes the body needed more direct intervention. Desba considered this, consulting silently with some internal calculus of knowledge and desperation. "We will try," she decided. "But you will help, and if the child dies, you will bear part of the responsibility." Tucker accepted this burden without hesitation. Together, they carefully transported Kiona to a shelter near the hot spring that provided the camp with unfrozen water even in the deepest winter. Desba directed the preparation of several containers of water at different temperatures, while Tucker helped support the barely conscious child. Her parents watched with expressions that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. The process was delicate and terrifying. They started with water that was slightly cooler than the child's burning skin, then gradually introduced cooler water in careful increments, always monitoring Kiona's breathing and heart rate. Tucker had never felt more acutely aware of his own ignorance, more conscious that he was operating on half-remembered fragments of technique with a child's life hanging in the balance. For the first hour, nothing seemed to change. Kiona remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid, her small body limp in their careful hands. Tucker began to despair, wondering if he had offered false hope, and would now be responsible for the child's death in front of her anguished parents. But Desba remained focused and methodical, trusting the process even when immediate results were not apparent. Then, gradually, imperceptibly at first, Kiona's skin began to cool. Her breathing slowed and deepened. Color that had been either flushed red or deathly pale began to return to something approaching normal. By the time the sun set and they carefully lifted her from the water and wrapped her in warm blankets, the fever had broken. Kiona's eyes fluttered open, confused and weak but undeniably alive. The parents wept openly, embracing their daughter, and then, to Tucker's profound discomfort and honor, embracing him and Desba with equal fervor. The healer, who had maintained her professional composure throughout the ordeal, finally allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "You have proven useful, Chadezi," she said with typical Apache understatement. "Perhaps there is wisdom in the white man's medicine after all." When combined with proper understanding, news of Kiona's recovery spread through the camp, and Tucker found his status elevated in ways he had not anticipated. He was no longer simply the white man who had been permitted to stay. He was becoming recognized as someone who contributed unique value to the community. Children who had once avoided him now sought him out with questions. Warriors who had remained skeptical now greeted him with respect. Women who had viewed him with suspicion now included him in conversations and shared their knowledge freely. One evening in late January, as Tucker sat repairing a broken snowshoe by firelight, Kosheda approached with an expression of unusual gravity. "We need to talk," the young warrior said. "Walk with me." They moved away from the central fires to a spot on the camp's perimeter where they could speak privately. Kosheda was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how to begin. Finally, he spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I owe you an apology," he said. "When you first came here, I saw you only as a threat and an insult to our people. I was wrong." Tucker was stunned by this admission from someone who had been among his harshest critics. "You were not wrong to be suspicious," he said carefully. "I was an outsider with a dangerous past. Your caution was warranted. My caution was warranted," Kosheta agreed. But my hostility was not. You have proven yourself through your actions, and I have been slow to acknowledge it. He paused, then continued. There is something else. My sister, Nasha, has been watching you. She sees in you qualities that she values: courage, humility, dedication to learning our ways. She has asked me to determine whether you might be interested in courting her. The statement hit Tucker like a physical blow. He had noticed Nasha, a woman of perhaps 25 winters who possessed both beauty and sharp intelligence, but he had never allowed himself to think of her in romantic terms. The idea that she might view him as a potential husband had simply not entered his calculations about his place in the band. I am honored beyond words, Tucker said slowly. Your sister is remarkable in every way. But I must be honest, I did not come here seeking a wife. I came seeking redemption and a new way to live, and you have found both, Kocheta replied. But life does not stop at redemption, Shah Desi. If you truly wish to become one of us, not just in name but in fact, then you must do as we do. You must build a family, raise children who will carry on our ways. Bind yourself to this people, not just through choice, but through blood and marriage. Tucker felt the weight of this expectation, understanding that it represented a threshold he had not yet considered crossing. Taking an Apache wife would mean permanent commitment, would mean children who would be Apache regardless of his own mixed heritage. I need time to think, he said finally. This is not a decision I can make in a moment. Kocheta nodded with apparent satisfaction. That is a wise answer, he said. Nasha deserves a man who chooses her with full heart, not one who acts from obligation or pressure. Take your time, but know that the offer stands in the days that followed. Tucker found himself watching Nasha with new awareness. She was helping her mother prepare hides, teaching young girls the intricate beadwork that Apache women had perfected over generations, tending to the communal tasks that kept the band functioning through the brutal winter. He noticed her patience with children, her quiet competence in everything she attempted, the way others sought her counsel on matters both practical and personal. She was, he realized, exactly the kind of woman who could be a true partner in the kind of life he was building. But the thought of marriage also brought his past rushing back with unexpected force. He found himself thinking about his mother, wondering what she would have thought of her son taking an Apache wife and raising Apache children. He thought about his father, Victor Rafferty, and whether the old outlaw had survived the battle on the mesa. These thoughts troubled his sleep and distracted him during the day until Haken finally confronted him. You are wrestling with ghosts, his friend observed. I can see it in your face. Speak of what troubles you. Tucker hesitated, then shared his concerns. His uncertainty about marriage, his unresolved feelings about his father, his fear that he was betraying something essential by fully committing to this new life. Haken listened without interruption, then responded with characteristic directness. You cannot live between worlds forever, he said. The shadows where you have been walking will eventually force you to choose one side or the other. Kosheta is right. If you truly wish to be Apache, you must embrace all of it, not just the parts that are comfortable or convenient. He paused, then added more gently. As for your father, you must accept that you may never know his fate. That uncertainty is the price you paid for freedom. By the time dawn broke, Tucker had made his decision. He found Kocheta at the morning fire and asked to speak with him privately. When they were alone, Tucker spoke with quiet certainty. I would like permission to court your sister, he said. Not because it is expected or because I feel obligated, but because I have watched her and see in her a woman of remarkable character. I cannot promise to be a perfect husband, but I can promise to honor her and to raise any children we might have to be proud members of this band. Kocheta studied Tucker's face for a long moment, then nodded with satisfaction. That is what I hope to hear, he said. I will speak with Nasha and with our parents. The Apache courtship customs were formal but practical. designed to allow two people to determine their compatibility before making a permanent commitment. Tucker was permitted to speak with Nasha in public settings, to work alongside her on communal tasks, and to demonstrate through his actions the kind of husband he would be. Nasha proved to be as intelligent and perceptive as he had observed. Their conversations ranged widely, from practical matters of camp life to deeper questions about values and vision for the future. She asked pointed questions about his past, refusing to accept vague answers or comfortable evasions. She wanted to know about the violence he had participated in, the people he had hurt, the choices he regretted. Tucker answered with painful honesty, understanding that anything less would be both disrespectful and ultimately futile. "I cannot undo what I have done," he told her. "I can only try to ensure that the rest of my life follows a different path. If that is not enough, if you cannot accept someone with my history, I will understand." Nasha considered this carefully. "Everyone has a history," she said. "What matters is whether that history teaches or imprisons. You seem to have learned from yours, and you are trying to build something better. That is more than many can say." As winter slowly released its grip and early spring began to emerge, Tucker formally asked Nasha to marry him according to Apache custom. She accepted, and preparations began for a wedding that would take place when the weather fully turned. Tucker found himself both excited and terrified by the commitment he was making. It was during these preparations that the past finally caught up with him. A Mexican trader who sometimes did business with the band arrived with disturbing news. Victor Rafferty had indeed survived the battle on the mesa and had spent the intervening months tracking his son. The old outlaw had learned through his network that Tucker was living with an Apache band somewhere in the region, and he was coming to find him. The news spread through the camp, raising immediate concerns. Knelt called an emergency council, and Tucker found himself once again standing before the band's leaders. "My father will come because he sees my departure as betrayal," Tucker said. "But I will not return with him, and I will not allow him to harm this band. If he comes in peace, I will speak with him and make him understand that my choice is final." Knelt studied him carefully, then nodded. "Very well. We will prepare for your father's arrival, but we will not hide or flee." 3 days later, a lookout spotted riders approaching from the north. It was Victor Rafferty and 2 men, all armed but showing no immediate signs of hostile intent. Tucker's heart pounded as he watched his father dismount at the camp's edge. When Victor's eyes finally found Tucker, something complicated flickered across his expression. They met in the center of camp with the entire band watching. Father and son faced each other across a distance that was measured in more than physical space. Victor spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "So it is true," he said. "My son has become a savage." Tucker felt anger rise but forced himself to respond calmly. "I have become a man," he said. "Not a savage, not your property, but a man who chose his own way. I am sorry if that causes you pain, but I am not sorry for the choice itself." Victor's face hardened. "You left me during a battle, abandoned your family when we needed you most. Men died that night because we were 1 gun short. Men died that night because of choices you made," Tucker countered. "Because you chose a life built on theft and violence. I did not cause those deaths. I simply refused to die alongside them." Haken stepped forward, positioning himself beside Tucker in a clear statement of alliance. "You are Victor Rafferty," the Apache warrior said. "Your son has spoken of you with respect despite everything. He has told us how you raised him alone after his mother's death. Those are worthy things, but they are not enough to chain a man to a life that destroys his spirit." Victor turned his attention to Haken, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You are the Apache I held prisoner, the one who saved Tucker's life. And now you stand together like brothers." Victor was silent for a long moment, visibly wrestling with emotions. Finally, he looked back at Tucker. "Are you happy here?" he asked. "Is this truly what you want?" Tucker felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Yes," he said simply. "I am happy, perhaps for the first time in my life. I have found purpose, community, and love. I am going to marry an Apache woman and raise Apache children." Victor nodded slowly, seeming to age before Tucker's eyes. "Then I have lost you," he said, and there was genuine grief in his voice. "You have not lost me," Tucker said, stepping closer. "I am still your son. But I am also more than that now, and you have to let me be more." The old outlaw's eyes glistened with moisture. "I do not know how to let go, then learn," Tucker said gently. "You could stay for the wedding if you wish. See for yourself that I am making a good life." Victor looked around at the camp that had become his son's home. Finally, he shook his head. "I cannot stay," he said. "This world is not mine, and I am too old to learn a new one." But he reached out and gripped Tucker's shoulder. "I am glad you survived the Copperhead's bite, son. And I am glad you found something worth living for." They embraced awkwardly, two men trying to bridge an unbridgeable distance, and then Victor turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted and sat for a moment looking down at Tucker. "If you ever need help, send word." "I will come for you, I know," Tucker said. "And I thank you for that. But I will not need rescuing, Father. I have already been saved." Victor rode away with his two companions, disappearing into the landscape. Tucker watched until they were gone, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and relief and closure. When he finally turned back to the camp, he found Nesha waiting, her expression understanding. "That was difficult," she observed, "but necessary," Tucker replied. "Some doors have to be closed before new ones can fully open." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, when spring had finally arrived with its promise of renewal and growth. It was a traditional Apache ceremony, with songs and dances and rituals that bound Tucker and Nasha together before the entire band. Tucker spoke his vows in fluent Apache, promising to be a good husband, a devoted father when the time came, and a faithful member of the community that had given him a second chance at life. As the celebration continued into the night, Tucker found himself standing apart for a moment with Hakan, looking at the stars that blazed overhead with impossible brightness. The Apache warrior raised a cup in salute. "To the Copperhead's bite," he said with gentle irony. "May we always be grateful for the poisons that force us to change." Tucker touched his cup to Hakan's and drank. Then he returned to the fire, to his new wife, to the life he had chosen with clear eyes and an open heart. The Shadow Walker had finally found his place in the light, and he would spend the rest of his days proving himself worthy of the gift he had been given. The Copperhead's venom that nearly killed him had instead transformed him, burning away the old life to reveal the new one underneath.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.